there, welcome. Come on in, grab a chair, and let me just clear some space on the desk here. If you've ever stepped into a historian's map room, you probably know that we don't just look at maps to figure out where things are. We look at them to understand why things happened. And today's explainer is a really special journey. We're going to look at the history and culture of the Philippines, but we're completely ditching the traditional timeline of dates and battles. Instead, we're putting on our geohistorical lens. We're going to analyze how the physical land itself, the mountains, the seas, the plains, served as the ultimate architect of the Filipino identity. Okay, let's dive into this. Look at this beautiful topographical map. A lot of times, we kind of just think of geography as the backdrop to human history, right? Like a painted set on a theater stage. But when you really look at the rugged peaks, the deep valleys, and the surrounding waters of the Philippine archipelago, you realize that the topography isn't just the backdrop. It's the main character. The physical landscape actively dictated where people settled, how they interacted, and what they believed. The land itself literally wrote the script for the human actors. So, consider this our map legend for today. We'll trace the path from the overarching geography of the Philippines to livelihood and terrain, the resulting ethno-linguistic groups, the Ilaya and Ilawod relations, and finally, foreign influence. All right, Section 1, Geography of the Philippines. The archipelagic blueprint. Before you can really understand a culture, you have to understand the physical container it was poured into. The ultimate cause of the cultural effects we see in the Philippines is its very physical makeup, 7,641. That is the number of islands that make up the Philippines. Seriously, I want you to just think about that number for a second. This isn't just some fun trivia fact for a pub quiz. Historically speaking, every single body of water between those 7,641 islands acted as a natural barrier. This massive physical fragmentation meant that early communities were naturally isolated from one another, completely separated by dense forests, towering mountain ranges, and pretty unpredictable seas. But layer right on top of that highly fragmented archipelagic blueprint a lush tropical climate. So you have thousands of isolated pockets of land, but almost all of them are incredibly fertile and bathed in tropical weather year-round. This unique combination made the land exceptionally ripe for distinct, localized agricultural growth. Essentially, each isolated community had the natural resources they needed to sustain themselves entirely independently. Moving to Section 2, Livelihood and Terrain, dictated by the land. Now, what's really interesting about this is that when communities are separated by challenging geography, where you happen to live entirely dictates how you survive. The environment wasn't just a place to build a house, it was literally an instruction manual for life. Look at the contrast here. On one side, you've got rolling, rugged mountain ranges, and on the other, pristine, expansive coastal waters. Visually, sure, they're stunning, but historically, they represent entirely different worlds of survival. I mean, the challenges of navigating a steep, forested mountain are obviously totally different from the challenges of reading ocean tides, and those distinct challenges bred completely different skill sets and ways of life. This geographic variety directly birthed a variety of economic survival strategies. Our sources point out some really specific historical examples. For instance, in regions like Mindanao, lands that were rich in mineral resources stimulated really robust local economies centered around mining. For the communities nestled right on the edges of the islands, the coastal waters naturally provided fishing as the absolute primary livelihood. Meanwhile, communities living in the vast plains naturally adopted farming as their standard way of life. The economy was, quite literally, grounded in the earth. Okay, Section 3, Ethno-linguistic groups, fragmented yet preserved. Let's shift our lens from economics over to culture for a bit. Because when the land dictates what you eat and how you work for generations, it ultimately shapes who you are. 182. Contrast this number directly with these 7,641 islands we just talked about. The physical fragmentation of the archipelago didn't just divide land masses, it divided humanity into 182 distinct ethno-linguistic groups. So each of these groups developed their own unique languages, belief systems, and social structures, all of which were heavily influenced by their specific isolated pocket of geography. But, there's actually a pretty beautiful silver lining to all this geographic fragmentation. Those massive mountains and dividing seas didn't just act as barriers to travel, they basically acted as natural vaults. The sheer difficulty of traversing the archipelago meant that unique, localized traditions and cultures were deeply protected. They were preserved from being washed away by outside influences, standing resilient even as modernization eventually began to sweep across the globe.
Which brings us to Section 4, Ilaya and Ilawood Relations, the Tale of Two Terrains.
Now, as much as the geography separated people, they obviously couldn't survive in total isolation forever. And this brings us to Ilaya and Ilawood. These are uniquely Filipino historical concepts that you absolutely need to know. Ilaya refers to the communities living in the mountains or upstream areas, and Ilawood refers to the communities living on the coast or downstream. The true history of the Filipino islands is largely built on the complex, really essential relationship between these two vastly different geographical spaces.
And this illustrates exactly how they interacted. Because their geographies were different, their resources were different, which led directly to the up-and-down trade system, historically known as pababa paakyat. The Ilaya would bring down resources from the mountains, things like gold, rice, wax, and rattan, and in exchange, the coastal Ilawod would trade things that could only be found by the sea, salt, marine products, and crucially, goods they acquired from foreign traders. So our ancestors actually had this brilliant, highly complex economic system built entirely on geographic interdependence.
The crucial point here is that this wasn't just some localized, one-off arrangement in a single village somewhere. We have hard linguistic proof of how fundamental this mountain-sea relationship was all across the archipelago. The Visayan language uses the terms Ilawood, Iraya, and the Ilocano language up in the north uses Laud, Daya. The fact that completely distinct ethno-linguistic groups share these exact geographical concepts proves that this economic trade system was a widespread, unifying thread of early Filipino culture.
Finally, Section 5, Foreign Influence and History, Flowing Through the Geography.
Let's see how this all builds when the outside world comes knocking. We need to explore what happened when external foreign forces interacted with this highly established yet fragmented geographic stage. Geography is really a double-edged sword when it comes to foreign influence. On one hand, the vast seas surrounding the Ilocano communities acted as these inviting highways. Trade with China, India, and the rest of Southeast Asia flowed in really easily via the coast, bringing enriching new ideas, technologies, and beliefs that were absorbed into the local culture. But on the other hand, when Spanish colonizers arrived, they recognized the physical separation of the islands, and they weaponized it. The natural geography was exploited to divide and conquer, deepening the fragmentation of the Filipino people for centuries.
I want you to read this profound thesis drawn directly from our source material. Our national identity was not formed in a single geography, but was carved by the interacting forces of the mountain and the sea that influenced our culture and history. It perfectly summarizes everything we've mapped out today. The Filipino identity isn't just one single thing. It is the friction, the trade, and the balance between the towering peaks and the coastal shores.
Which leaves us with this final thought. The next time you look at a map of the Philippines, or a map of anywhere really, I challenge you to look past the borders and the city names. Do you just see islands floating in an ocean? Or, armed with your new geohistorical lens, do you finally see the interacting forces of nature, trade, and survival that carved out an entire national identity? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and hey, always keep questioning what's beneath the map.